to deviate, both in the hopes of being closer to the time limits imposed, and then just because most of this has already been said, I think we're beginning to get a little bit weary. On that note, I want to thank the Council's exceptional staff for providing water to the table. In light of the water vapor debate, I wasn't sure if they were trying to poison me, but I think the gesture is well intended. The problem I have, therefore, as I deviate from the testimony is, and as I sat here and observed the committee hearing, there's a lot of fear-mongering going on, and I was surprised to even hear that already brought up before I got to it. It's startling to me that we're discussing regulations where, with respect to Councilman Greenlee, the justification is we don't understand it, we don't know that it's dangerous, but I guess we should regulate it. That seems to be a deviation from the political process that Councilwoman Sanchez has eloquently pointed out. For Dr. Schwartz to say that, quote, the science just isn't there yet, at the same time to justify regulation, whereas also bemoaning the fact that we don't know what's going on, just seems to be a departure from the traditional legislative process, as surprisingly has already been mentioned by my panelist, Mr. Phillips. There are indeed many studies, and I worry that the way things have been presented today that we just don't know is on some level sticking one's hand in the sand. It would be appropriate, I think, to regulate based on the evidence. We too were going to mention Professor Bursley from Drexel University. He's somewhat local, I'm sure he'd be happy to follow up with the Council, ask him, he has published studies, and the major conclusion of that study is that there is really no danger from secondhand vapor, if you want to call it that. Electronic cigarettes are not being targeted in our youth. We and the people we have spoken with do not oppose banning or regulating the sales of electronic cigarettes to youth, but as the other panelists before me have said, the promise is the way that this particular bill is drafted. We would support it being amended to clarify what it does and what it does not apply to. The premise that vaping devices are dangerous is really a flawed issue with the second and more major regulatory move by the Council. Whether or not it conflicts with the Commonwealth's own actions, as the Councilwoman previously pointed out, is I guess ultimately a question for the courts. But I do just want to conclude by saying it seems odd to me that while we are promoting regulations, and Dr. Ross mentioned this before, we blame electronic vaping devices or cigarette manufacturers who oftentimes have been purchased by tobacco companies but are rarely in fact developed by them. We blame them for not saying this is an electronic smoking cessation device when we're not allowed to do so. It seems again that we hide ourselves within the fold of political chicanery when we at once claim that we don't know what's going on, think that we have enough science upon which to base a regulation, and we fault people for not claiming that which would be illegal for them to fault. So I guess I conclude with urging the Council to consider the vast amount of evidence that does seem to be out there now, and to propose and promote responsible regulation targeting sales to minors, and to take into account the true science and the distinction between vaping and actual tobacco cigarette use when promoting any further proposals. Thank you. We're losing the Council.
Just ask you a question. What is the joy in using e-cigarettes?
What is the joy?
What's the joy? What's the
Well, honestly, I'll let others perhaps answer after me. I use it either. I believe the joy that people get is the health benefit that they perceive from having a far less dangerous, far lower content. The joy that they get is the ability to be able to use it in areas where it would be inappropriate to use tobacco products because of the impact, and because that impact is really significantly less about other people. The access with which they have to use it, I believe, is another promoting factor. The convenience with which they use it is a promoting factor.
Do the cigarettes contain nicotine? What's it?
Most e-cigarettes contain nicotine, but they don't have to. Some people that have quit smoking, thanks to e-cigarettes, have tapered down their nicotine level gradually to zero over the course of weeks, months, or even years. Many just enjoy the nicotine anyway without the toxins and carcinogens. A nicotine from an e-cigarette is not toxic. As a matter of fact, a nicotine in a regular cigarette is not toxic. Many people think that nicotine is a toxin or carcinogen. Even some physicians think so. It's false. Nicotine in a cigarette is an important part of the addictive quality of cigarette smoke, but nicotine per se is not toxic. I'm curious as to why you asked, if you don't mind my asking, about the pleasure.
joy and build.
I'm going to pass the mic on to the expert in that subject, Dr. Carl Fultz.
As both the scientific expert and as the only, as far as I know, pt user on the current panel, but there are certainly plenty in the room. I use nicotine because it is a wonderful cognitive enhancer. It makes my brain work better. This is true for an awful lot of people. It's very much like caffeine, and the analogy of caffeine continues beyond that. They are both relatively harmless, although either one is perfectly harmless, but basically the risk is about the same. The effects are very similar. Some people, of course, become habitual users. I for one, can take it or leave it. Some people are not in that fortunate situation, and therefore find that the opportunity to use a low-risk form of nicotine, such as e-cigarettes or smokeless tobacco, allows them to not suffer the enormous difficulty of going from smoking to abstinence, but to still basically eliminate the health risks, in the range of 99% of all the health risks. And so those are some. There are a few other reasons why people like to use this. But the simplest possible answer that I think everybody can understand is for the same reason that people drink coffee.
I have only two very, very fast things to say. One, it hasn't been said yet. Nobody wants anybody to take up nicotine who is not already on nicotine. E-cigarettes are for people who are addicted smokers, to use them to quit. And second, people refer to evidence-based medications and methodologies to help smokers quit. The FDA-approved medications, including Zyban, bupropion, and Chantix, varenicline, and the patches and the gums, work rarely. Somebody did say that, but let me emphasize that. They work between 5 and 10% of the time, so that when you tell people, smokers, addicted smokers, over 50% of them are going to die from smoking, to stick to the FDA-approved products, you're telling them to quit or die.
To say that we're telling them that, that's ridiculous. You say it was like telling them to die, that's ridiculous. And I really have a problem with that.
The FDA-approved methods do not work, so when you tell an addicted smoker to use the quit lines and the FDA-approved methods and to not use e-cigarettes, as all the federal and most of the local health agencies do, you warn them not to try e-cigarettes, stick to the FDA-approved products. What you're telling them is quit your addiction to nicotine, or else have over 50% chance of dying from continuing to smoke. Maybe I should have phrased it that way.
Let me just say this. I said in my opening statement that a lot of the producers of electronic cigarettes are the tobacco companies. Is that not an accurate statement? In my opinion.
By far the majority of the producers are not major tobacco companies. Electronic cigarettes were created, perfected, and popularized by companies that had no connection to the traditional tobacco industry.
cigarette markets and helping the big tobacco companies.
They are like advocating against the bill, sir. They're advocating against the bill. So if they just want to help them, why wouldn't they want to see this bill go forward?
I frankly have no insight into that.
Okay, let me ask, the other two witnesses made a point of saying they had no connection with tobacco companies and their organization was not supported by tobacco companies. Will you three say the same thing? Mr. Ross, or Dr. I'm sorry, Dr.
The American Council on Science and Health will accept no strings attached donations from anybody that will send us money.
Do you get support from tobacco companies?
Yes.
Okay.
CASA doesn't get any, has refused offers of support from traditional tobacco companies.
So you do not get support. The American Council on Science and Health does, right?
Yes, and if you wish to perceive of the American Council on Science and Health as being a wholly owned subsidiary of a big tobacco company, feel free to do so. Nevertheless, everything I said here remains true.
I didn't say anything to use the word subsidiary. I tried to use that word wrong. I just asked a question.
I was reading the reductio ad absurdum, but still all of the reductio, meaning it's whether we get 1% of our funding from tobacco companies or 99.8%, everything I said was still true.
It's your opinion. Whether it's true, it's obviously an argument. And Ms. Dana, I hear your
Science.
We are not supported by it.
All right, that's fine.
It's a simple answer.
Okay, and let me just in general say, I know people use words like hate mongering and all that. I don't think we're doing any of the kind, and I could go on for a long time with that. It's something that well, I think it was hate, then it was zero.
I think it's both here. We're hopeful that Councilman O'Brien, professing expertise in amending bills, will be able to help bring these bills back to, a more specific and well-intended purpose, particularly the youth directed bill.
I'm focused on consolidate.
I'm sure the Commonwealth
Actually,
will forward to your.
Councilman O'Brien can speak for himself, but I think he told me he supports the bills.
But now I think he's going to hear reason from, I'm sure he's helping to the constituency's testimony, and they'll try to improve it, because that's his legislative history.
You're right. I'm not interested in having you over tonight. I'll make my mistakes.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Next,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Weber, Patrick Carroll, David Keller, and Chris. Donnie.
Conley.
I'm sorry.
Pfeiffer, right?